Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us here at Child Care Aware of America. We have a webinar in store for you today on the 2016 Election Debrief. I just wanted to, before we do introductions and talk about the agenda for today, I wanted to turn your attention to the chat feature on your screen, the way that you'll open the webinar. There's a little box that says chat, and if you have questions, please feel free during the time that we have together to type your questions, and we will absolutely be checking them throughout the presentation, but have some carved out time in the middle and at the end of our conversation today to ensure that we answer them. So thank you again for joining us. My name is Michelle McCready. I'm the Chief of Public Policy here at Child Care Aware of America. So you'll be hearing from me and our Director of Federal Policy and Governmental Affairs, Jay Nichols. And what we wanted to talk with you all about today are the results of the presidential and congressional election that took place last week. There is also a lot of impact for states and state chambers and what happened in at state legislator level, so we'll go in a deep dive to talk about. We also wanted to talk a little bit about the transition period and looking ahead what the next several weeks are going to look like in a presidential year, and some of our best guesses on who is going to be in different priority positions within the administration. And then, in the bulk of the time, we wanted to spend some discussion, dialogue, conversation around is turning into action now. We have our Child Care Work movement that we've launched this year to really build and organize and mobilize the grassroots around quality child care. So we're going to spend some time on what that looks like and how to advocate for quality child care in your state. So with that, and before we get into the grassroots element, we're going to do a recap. I'm going to hand it over to Jay Nichols to talk about what happened last week, Tuesday. Go ahead,
Thanks, Michelle, and good afternoon to everyone on the phone. Thanks for joining us, and we will. Our goal today is to present you with as much information that we know now. Some of it obviously is known, but as far as like how over the next roughly 60 to 70 days before we hit January 20th of next year, before the official transition takes effect. Throughout the coming weeks and next couple months, we can assure all of you that any new information that we've learned that's relevant to the type of work and advocacy that we do, we'll be sure to share it with you once we learn it. So please regularly check back at our news page on our website, as well as our Capital Connection is still going to run every 2 weeks, and we will have as many new updates as possible. So moving forward, our 2016 election ended last Tuesday after about 1.5 years to almost 2 years of campaigning, and Donald J. Trump will be the 45th President of the United States. He won with the popular vote. Currently, the popular vote takes about a month to officially tabulate, since some states have different counting methods as far as absentee measures, and very large states such as Texas and California, because of the large populations, just take a while to tabulate all votes. But Donald Trump did win with roughly 47.2% of the popular vote. Secretary Clinton received about 0.5 to 0.7% more in the popular vote. But the key thing is that he did carry the Electoral College. He currently, with 219 electoral votes, this included victories in states that the Republican candidate hasn't won in quite some time. I think for the most part, you have to go back to the Reagan era before some of these states were carried by the Republican candidate. To give you a little bit more, to show you how it looks, there is one state that is not yet completed, although that's the state of Michigan, although it does look like that President-elect Trump will carry that state as well. So our next president again will be Donald J. Trump. Mike Pence, the governor of Indiana, is now also the vice president-elect and is currently in charge of trying to manage the transition team to succeed the Obama administration. Now, in addition, obviously, to the presidential race, we also did have a congressional one as well, and the Democrats in the Senate did manage to gain roughly 2 seats by winning the Illinois and New Hampshire races. They also picked up a handful of seats, and again, in the House, this is projection. It's not. Basically, we're not including all races here because, well, for example, in Louisiana, they have a runoff for pretty much for a majority of their seats early next month. But right now, it's looking like Democrats picked up a handful of seats in the House. There are over 50 new House members that will be coming to Washington in January, as well as, there are, in addition to pickups in the Senate, there were also a number of people who retired and a handful of people who retired, and that there are going to be 5 new, at least at this time. There still hasn't been decided in Louisiana, that open seat, but there are at least going to be at least 5 new senators in the 115th Congress. And in addition to the congressional layout here, the leadership is roughly staying the same. Paul Ryan is expected to remain the Speaker of the House, along with Kevin McCarthy as the Majority Leader. Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi is expected to remain the Minority Leader, as with Maryland Congressman Steny Hoyer likely to be the Minority Whip member. And in the Senate, Mitch McConnell will remain Majority Leader, as well as John Cornyn of Texas, Majority Whip. The Democrats do have a new, with the retirement of Harry Reid, New York Senator Chuck Schumer will be the new Senate Minority Leader, and Senator Patty Murray of Washington will be an Assistant Minority Leader. So it's a fairly new position, as well as West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin heading up a lot of the Democratic policy initiatives. His policy, I believe, is actually, I think he's vice policy chair, but he is, Mr. Schumer is asking him to take the lead on a number of issues. And I'm going to actually briefly hand this over back to Michelle, as she's going to just summarize. There were some pretty significant developments at the state level in this election as well. So, Michelle?
Great. Thanks so much, Jay. As Jay pointed out, a lot happened at the national front on Tuesday, but also there was a lot of shift in state legislatures. So post-election, the Republicans will now control 66 of the 98 partisan state legislative chambers, and Democrats will control 30 of those chambers, and one of the chambers currently is tied. If you can see on the graphic, you'll see that the yellow indicates states that are split between Republican and Democratic bodies. You'll see that Maine, Connecticut, and Colorado. There also are, in Nebraska, there's a nonpartisan state legislature, and New York is one of a few that actually hasn't been decided at this point right now. So some noteworthy changes within the state legislature are that 3 chambers actually did switch from Democratic to Republican control on Tuesday, and those include the Kentucky House, the Iowa Senate, and the Minnesota Senate. They switched from Democratic to Republican control. And actually 4 chambers switched from Republican to Democratic control. And that was the New Mexico House, the Nevada Assembly, the Nevada Senate, and the Washington Senate. And something interesting about Washington is that Republicans will have functional control, as one Democrat will actually caucus with the Republicans in that chamber. And then there's still a tie, as I mentioned before, with the Connecticut Senate. And then another nuance to the state legislators is that in Alaska, the House will be governed by a coalition that gives Democrats functional control of the chambers, despite the Republicans actually leading that chamber by the numbers. And so we always rely on our wonderful partners at NCSL to provide us with wonderful information about what's happening at the state. You can find at ncfl.org lots around budget implications, different things that happened on Tuesday and impacts for each of those states.
Well, thanks, Michelle, for that update. And we are now going to move forward really into the transition phase as to what we have been learning, as well as what we know for sure is expected as the incoming Trump administration staffs up, not only in the White House but also in the relevant federal agencies. Just want you to please take note of, we're putting a little disclaimer up here. What we're sharing with you is, again, it's based on what, we're saying based on projections, but it's really based on what we know for certain and what's been confirmed. And as of right now, there's just a lot of names being thrown out, but this actual transition is moving. We're just a little over a week out, and usually at this point you don't really have confirmed names, with the exception of maybe some of the more major cabinet with regards to foreign policy and defense. But even that hasn't really been decided yet. So the information we are sharing with you is what we know as of this moment, and we hope to learn more, obviously, very soon. So what we do know for sure is that it appears that the current head of the Republican National Committee, Reince Priebus, is going to be President-elect Trump's chief of staff. With regards to, and obviously you maybe know that chief of staff is pretty much the ear to the president. Obviously it's a managerial role. It's very, very probably, as far as like the presidency, the president itself, the office of president itself, this is probably the most important position. Obviously, and Mr. Priebus has been running the RNC for the last several election cycles. He comes from the private sector background, but this is his first, going to be his first White House job ever. So other positions such as Domestic Policy Council, this is where key staff have been handling all major issues, including education and children's issues. We haven't heard of any. We haven't heard of any potential staff to join that office in the West Wing. As well as with the Office of Public Engagement, which is the office tasked with reaching out to groups to help to work on specific policy, including all policy related to the tech work we've been doing. Pretty much everybody in the West Wing is, come January, it's going to be a new staff. They're all Schedule C political appointees, and even if the party, even if just hypothetically if Secretary Clinton won, these same staff would have to resign their jobs anyway. It's under federal law. So we're going to, obviously here at Child Care of America, we have a lot of new people to meet and work with. We intend to start working with them before January 20th, as we are very, very engaged in outreach with this transition. But as far as like specific people in the West Wing, key staffers, we anticipate in the coming weeks some other key roles will be filled, and we hope that we soon learn, particularly into the DPC and the Office of Public Engagement, who will be heading up those offices. As far as the cabinet is concerned, just so you know, we haven't heard, and specifically the Administration of Children and Families, we haven't heard any potential names yet. But we have heard, as far as who will be running the Department of Health and Human Services, there are 3 names that have come up, and the first one is former Louisiana Governor, you see the picture, Bobby Jindal, who, as you said, not only former governor, but also worked at the state level in the healthcare sector for the state of Louisiana. You also see Governor Rick Scott of Florida. The current governor of Florida, he also worked in the health sector field, the private sector health field as well. And a new name that recently just came up is current Congressman Tom Price, who is he's currently the chair of the House Budget Committee, but he is also a doctor, and he does have a pretty storied background in healthcare and in healthcare policy. So those are currently the cabinet members that are floating around for Department of HHS. Dr. Ben Carson was a part of this initial list too. However, just yesterday he withdrew from being considered for any role in the incoming Trump administration. And with regards to the Department of Education, and obviously this affects a number of new grant programs, including preschool development grants. It's a partnership with Head Start, Early Child Care Partnerships, and Head Start itself. This is obviously going to be a critical position to fill. The first person that you see here, in fact, that's his photo, is Congressman Luke Messer. He is, from what we have been told, he is the leading candidate. However, we don't know if he intends to. He has a pretty prominent role in Congress in education. Another person is William Evers. He is currently with the Hoover Institution, and he's actually a part of the Mr. Trump's transition team, and actually served in the George W. Bush administration as a senior advisor to then Education Secretary Margaret Spellings. And another one too, although I think it's viewed as many as a long shot. However, Michelle Reed her name is now floated as a possible to have to be the next possible education secretary. And for those of you, she had Ms. Reed had dedicated herself to education reform here and served as a chancellor, as also the former chancellor of the Washington D.C. public school system. So again, these are the names that are floated. There could be more. Some folks may, some of these names may be removed and some may be added. But we anticipate that hopefully fairly soon, we will get an actual person nominated, and then they will likely proceed to the confirmation hearings, which will probably happen in early January. So I guess moving forward on the transition now, it's moving on from who could be leading these agencies and who could be leading this West Wing. We want to just quickly revisit what Mr. Trump, in partnership with his daughter, Ivanka, published just a couple of months ago with regards to child care. And what you see on your screen is pretty much the main points. His proposal would seek to rewrite part of the tax code and provide how families gain access to quality programs that way. It would allow parents with up to 4 children to deduct child care expenses from their income taxes. And it also proposes 6 weeks of paid maternity leave, not family leave, maternity leave. We'll provide $1,200 in annual spending rebates, particularly for low-income families. There are there are limits. Families that earn more than $500,000 will not be eligible for this tax break, and single parents earning more than $250,000 annually would also not qualify. One thing is worth noting is that in his 100 days memo, which the Trump transition team published shortly after last Tuesday, he did include what he called child care tax reform and child care facilities. Not really sure what the child care facilities language is intended. However, it does seem to me, and even of course we have at the bottom in their interview with 60 Minutes this past Sunday, it does appear to us that he wants to fulfill his commitment to try to improve child care here in the United States. So that is obviously very important. It's Michelle and I, as well as the rest of our public policy staff, are engaging the Trump people and how we could work together to possibly come up with not only with them, but with the Republicans and Democrats on Capitol Hill, see if we can come up with a workable plan. And now how, I guess the next thing would be, how would we achieve that? One way could be what's called an infrastructure bill that has been in discussion for quite some time, and it looked like Congress is going to move on one regardless of who won last week. They'll possibly move on something in early to mid 2017. This plan would mostly involve a lot of infrastructure, transportation, waterway, a lot of an attempt to repair a lot of our aging infrastructure. However, there may be an opportunity to get support for child care, whether it be for CCDBG or for for other child care initiatives, we think that that could be a considerable opportunity for us. There could also be a tax relief package in some form being pushed sometime in the next Congress, which is where any changes to child tax credit programs or possibly incorporating Mr. Trump's, some of his tax-related proposals, that could also be a potential opportunity to work. As always, the annual federal budget process is not an opportunity. It's important and it's required, and that's something we have to maintain our engagement in the hopes that we can continue to find bipartisan consensus to support quality child care and early childhood development programming. However, we're going to be honest with you. There are probably some changes coming. There have been folks in leadership on Capitol Hill kind of looking to cut spending again considerably, like they did 5 or 6 years ago. Again, this is a projection. We haven't heard anything specific, nor have we seen any specific proposal to do so, but it is very likely that, programs that support children and families could be at risk. Not necessarily CCDBG, since that was unanimously passed by Congress 2 years ago, but other programs such as Head Start, Women, Infants, and Children, food stamps, school nutrition programs. These potentially could be put at risk in an effort to cut spending and then try to find a way to reduce the deficit. So we have to be very, very conscious of that, and we have to obviously be, it's going to be very, very important moving into the next Congress administration that we make it very, very clear that actions like this would not be acceptable. In fact, would harm children and families. So again, we hope to learn more in the coming days and weeks, but we just want to let you know that it's can't say for sure, but we're not so sure when President Trump publishes his first budget proposal, it's going to be as favorable budget proposal of Congress that will be as favorable as the last 7 or 8 have been for programs to support children. So with that, I think this is a good segue, Michelle, for you to kind of talk about the importance of advocacy and head back into our Child Care Works movement. So feel free to take it from here.
Great, thanks so much, Jay. And just to reiterate the point that you ended on around, it's now definitely a great time to stand up, to advocate. You'll see on the slide what that means is that public support for our recommendation of a particular cause or policy. And today what we're talking about is childcare and how to support and stand up for, and it sometimes play defense, sometimes play offense around creating strong policies. So advocacy, the basic definition, like I said, is standing up for that cause, standing up for what you believe in, sharing your passion, and sharing what you see. And I think there's been some misinterpretation of advocacy. It is not lobbying. We'll talk a little bit about what the difference between advocacy and lobbying is before we talk about ways that you can get involved. So there are 2 different kinds of lobbying. The first type of lobbying is direct lobbying, and what that means is it's a communication with a legislator or a staff person directly. And during that communication, you're referring to a specific piece of legislation and you're taking a position on it. So I'll use the example of the Child Care and Development Block Grant reauthorization. When talking to a policymaker, it is lobbying if you use the bill number, which was 1086 at the time, and you say, yes, please vote yes, please pass the CCDBG reauthorization. That is a form of direct lobbying because you're referring to the legislation and you're taking a position. The other type of lobbying, like I said before, is grassroots lobbying. And this is communicating and activating the public to do something. And in that ask, you are referring to a specific piece of legislation and you're reflecting a view on that legislation in favor of it or opposed to it. And then you're also containing in that communication of something that we call a CTA or a call to action. So you're mobilizing others to do something around a particular piece of legislation that reflects a view on it. And just to define call to action a little bit more, a call to action specifically refers to asking the public to contact legislators or their staff to mobilize them to do something. And also giving them the means, so providing the legislators' contact information and other ways of communicating with them is what traditionally you'll see in grassroots lobbying. So I did want to talk a little bit about what nonprofits can do. And the reason we started with this is that surprisingly, you can advocate as a nonprofit, and you can actually lobby too. And we have a lot of information on our website and a whole resource around advocacy versus lobbying. But you have to ensure that you're a 501c3 organization and that you're tracking your lobbying hours very carefully and according to the tax code. So we'll be providing additional resources on that as well. So I just wanted to pause before we move on with Child Care Works and how and what you can do in response. We do have a couple of questions, mainly about the slides being available. Yes, the slides are available. If you'd like a copy of the original slides, you can absolutely get that. Also, if you can email us to get that, we also are recording this webinar and we'll be posting it shortly after this. Okay, so I am going to talk about our movement, which we're calling our Child Care Works movement and the way forward. So we're going to just discuss what's next for Child Care Works and some of our strategies around the new administration and how to proceed. We'll dive into some tips for advocacy, including building relationships with policymakers, how to engage advocates, specifically members within the community, families, grandparents, and others that care about this issue. And then lastly, how to maximize media opportunities and build your grassroots plans using the need for affording and finding to us that both what they do agree on is that the problem is clear, that families are in crisis, honestly, to trying to find and afford quality child care for their children in their communities. Another piece about why now is so important is the climate. It's been at the presidential, during the election cycle, at the national conversation around women and family issues, and it will be, and we will advocate for it to be a priority in the next administration. So it's really where this need and the climate meets the opportunity, and that's what we're going to talk about today. How can we leverage this time? What's the way forward, and how do we ensure that child care and programs that impact and affect so many children and families in this country aren't hurt further, but they're supported and are ultimately supporting the children in this country. So tips for advocacy. So building relationships with policymakers. We'll talk a little bit about that and why it's important, especially right now in times of transition. Family and community engagement and how advocacy is a major piece of that. And then maximizing media outreach. So we thought there's a lot of ways to advocate. We thought these were particularly relevant during this time of transition. So the first is building relationships with policymakers. So researching. I call this the 3 R's. Research, reach out, and then return. So research means, especially when you have new elected officials, and this doesn't just mean your senator or your congressional representative, and either if they're new or old, it's still a great time to do some research around them. But especially for the new folks, to learn as much as possible about them and their background, to really understand them and to be able to speak to their values and know where they stand on the issue. So that will help you do your own homework and background before you do the next R, which is reach out. And so it's critical that when you make contact with their legislator, that they know that you're from their district, that you're a voting piece of their constituency, We've heard from several staffers time and time again, and representatives themselves, is that they always like to get out of the office, get out of the DC and the Beltway, and go back to their district and visit a child care program and facility to really see what happens in those settings. And that's really when the story becomes a reality, when policymakers can see how important and impactful child care workers and teachers are, and where children are during the day. And so ensure that part of your reach out, besides setting up a meeting or calling them or emailing them, bring them along, bring them out into the field and into communities. And then the third R is return. Whenever you meet with your public official, ensure that you're sending them a follow-up email, providing them with resources, thanking them for their time, constantly thanking being plugged in if they take a certain vote that you support or agree with. Share news about child care and issues relevant, reports, white papers, that type of thing, and research that shows a positive impact for child care and also a legislative position that you'd like them to take. So the 3 R's: research, reach out, and return. And that's just the beginning of really building an ongoing and long-lasting relationship with policymakers. And the second tip that I wanted to dive a little bit into is something that I'm incredibly passionate about personally, and have seen time and time again of the effect and impact of leveraging parent and family voices to change and shape policy. No matter what the issue, in this case child care, honestly, what impacts policy the most are things that impact families and communities. And so having parents, activating parents and grandparents and advocates to share their story really does paint that picture best for policymakers to understand what's at the root of the problem, and be able to change the challenges that parents are experiencing. So I see this in 3 parts when you're encouraging parents. And the first is to invite them when we're recruiting parent leaders, invite them to have coffee, one-on-one, building that personal relationship, reaching out, bringing them in, letting them know how important and impactful their voice is. And you can do that by empowering, the second step, which is training parents and family advocates on how to use their voice. I think in Every I teach a lot of different classes for school social work students, and this is the most surprising to them, I'd say, and I think to the community in general, is that anybody anywhere can pick up the phone and have a meeting with their representative, and their story, they work for us, right? Their story is impactful, and having that and helping parents do that is a key piece in the puzzle of getting things done. So the third is the empowering, training them how to tell their story, ensuring that their story includes some background about who they are and why they're there, highlighting the challenge, and then always providing a next step and a solution, and never ever leaving a meeting without talking to that policymaker on what they can do next to change. And that's the third thing, creating opportunities or leveraging existing opportunities to engage parents. So if you are a CCR&R or community organization and you have a board meeting or any conferences coming up, or a state capitol visit or different policy or meetings of policymakers, bring a parent along, have them there, have several parents, and really getting them involved and invested in the work that you all do is a great way to recruit and retain wonderful advocates. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about was maximizing media and setting up a media campaign. So I always say this to my team here, is that we have to meet advocates where they're at. They are, and what we know, especially for our target audience, are millennial parents, for our Child Care Works movement. And what we've learned is they're online. They're on Twitter, they're on Instagram, they're on Facebook, they're on mommy blogs. They're sharing their experiences, their challenges, their frustrations with finding and affording affording quality childcare, and a lot of them want to do something about it. So Childcare Works, we've been trying to engage many different voices and faces in our movement. And one of the best ways to reach out to parents is through digital and social media platforms. We've had a lot of our fantastic parent advocates either find us or we find them through those venues. So if you don't have with your organization a Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook account set up, definitely set one up and start reaching out. Another piece and strategy around what you can do now and really thinking about making childcare a priority is establishing media connections and contacts, and that's at all different levels. So it could be your local paper, it can be your state paper, it can be the Washington Post, but starting to really nurture media connections and relationships and looking them up in your town is critical in eventually getting stories publicized about the importance of quality childcare. And then what I say is work all mediums. So that's not just a press release when you have an event, but that's press conferences for childcare facility opening, press events with a VIP like that state or local or congressional or Senate member that you invite to tour, make it an event and have invite the press. And then also letters to the editor, which are called LTEs, which you can write in. Anybody can write in a letter to the editor, or an opinion editorial, which those op-eds are incredibly impactful when especially a grassroots leader, like an executive director within an agency or organization, shares their perspectives and insights and stories about what's happening. And then lastly, take action, take action, take action. So we have our Legislative Action Center. We are hosting everything right now around advocacy at childcareworks.org. Please visit. You can leverage our different share kits and petitions and tools to activate your own networks to care about this issue there. We're very proud of this movement. We've had tens of thousands of people join us just over the past 6 weeks, and we're looking forward to that growing and increasing and continuing with our wonderful coalition partners at the national and state level to really move the needle for quality child care. And I then, of course, wanted to put in a plug. Child Care Works Day on the Hill. We are having a Day on the Hill conference in DC in April, at the end of April. We will host more than 40 parent advocates. The scholarship announcement is going out soon. Parent advocates and others that come to our Day on the Hill and Policy Institute will meet with lawmakers and the administration to advocate for different enhancements and advancements in child care legislation, ensure that nothing's cut but fully supported. And this is a critical timeline of the first 100 days. We'll be really focused on making these connections, doing all that I talked about, maximizing the media, reaching out and engaging parents, and of course reaching out and building relationships with our administration, with Congress, with Senate, and at the local level during those first 100 days. This is kind of the grand finale of those first 100 days at the end of April, where we can come together and really stand up for quality, affordable child care. So great. So I am going to make sure I put our contact information, Jay, on the screen and turn it over to see if there's any questions.
Perfect. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask them via our question and chat feature. Once again, we've had several folks ask us about the availability of slides. These slides will be made available and put on our website soon. In addition to that, this is being recorded and will be on our Child Care of America YouTube page very shortly as well.
Thanks so much. So This is an earlier question about, while this is also unfolding, do you think there will be any policy opportunities for helping boost the quality of child care programs, maybe in the infrastructure bill? So yeah, that's a great question, and absolutely. We're going to be looking at every turn, as Jay presented out some of the opportunities before, if it's infrastructure, if it's budget. Yes, I think there's a huge need for, we obviously don't cut. Only 1 out of 6 families right now that are eligible to receive subsidy are actually able to. So that needs to be increased access. But also access to quality child care and making the case for quality needs to be a big piece of, is going to be a big piece of our strategy. And we'll be looking for opportunities like the infrastructure bill to make that case.
Right, and to add to Michelle's point, with every new administration, there usually are, if not one, a couple of major legislative packages. It's usually common with the new leadership that comes in. So there could be, it could be infrastructure. We also may have an opportunity through a potential tax package as well. So unfortunately at this point we don't know much detail, but we do think that there are definitely opportunities to expand access to quality child care in some way, shape, or form legislatively next year.
Great. And then another question is on how might the need for more child care be promoting that thought along with Trump's commitment and aligning that with his commitment to bring back jobs. So talking about, that's a great question about messaging and how we can talk about child care as a core piece of infrastructure for our economy, right? It's not only a workforce support for people who need to work, families that need to work, but also it's an investment into our future workforce. And it's an investment for businesses and the employers if their employees have strong and stable child care. So it's a great point, and we really are working on messaging how child care is a core piece of economic support. Okay. And then there was a question about, will there be any more information from us on our website on the different impacts on child care professionals and wages in such as Washington State? Fantastic question. As part of our Child Care Works campaign, we are definitely going to be looking at addressing the child care workforce and supporting policies that support increasing wages for child care workers, and also the importance of the profession. Working with partners like NACI and AUIC and others to do that. And information research, we actually have our cost of child care report coming out on December 7th. And one of the features of that report is going to be talking about the workforce and the importance of supporting a quality workforce in that as well. Okay, a couple more questions about slides and or recording. We will have that on our website, usa.childcareware.org, very shortly after this presentation. Great. Well, that looks like all the questions for us. Again, I have our contact information right up there. If you all have anything further, please feel free to reach out. We are always available and willing to help support. We'll be doing and dialing up a lot of different advocacy, so more to come from us in this time of transition, our first 100 days. And we look forward to working with you to build out our movement and to ensure that childcare is top of mind. All right, well, thank you guys, and have a great rest of your day. Take care.